giving people advice about as they're coming up. The one theme that I was going to say is diversification, in that when you're starting out, sure, you only want to do, let's say in my case, I only want to score movies. That's all I want to do. But on the way there, I've done everything from, all these different playing situations, all these different writing situations. Like, you just do a whole bunch of stuff, and then hopefully one of them catches fire and takes off. And so similarly, being able to read music, why not? It's like learning another language, being bilingual. Like, why not do that? Especially if you have time.
Yeah. Welcome to the Vocal Lab. I'm Sarah Ramsey, and this show aims to pull back the curtain on the entertainment industry, where veterans give up-and-coming artists some of the information they wish they'd had when they were just starting out. Sort of a music industry primer, if you will. I am here today with Jim McGrath, and he is a Toronto-based composer, best known for his television work, including the hit series Degrassi, The Next Generation, Killjoys, CBC's Republic of Doyle, and Kids in the Hall, Death Comes to Town. His feature film and documentary work is just as impressive. Credits include Tulipani, Love, Honor, and a Bicycle, directed by Oscar-winning director Mike Van Diem, The Last Mogul, The Life and Times of Lou Wasserman, Foolproof, starring Ryan Reynolds, the Columbia TriStar thriller Resurrection, and Odeon's Treed Murray, which nominated for 5 Genie Awards, including Best Picture and Outstanding Achievement in Music. The score for Treed Murray went on to win gold in the film festival in Mar del Plata, Argentina. Jim's latest feature documentary, Curb Your Carbon, airs on CBC and is narrated by Ryan Reynolds. You guys seem to have a parallel path there.
Kinda.
McGrath has orchestrated and conducted film scores with the Munich Symphony, the Salt Lake Symphony, the London Philharmonia, and the City of Prague Philharmonic. He's also written arrangements for such recording artists as Tom Cochrane with the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, Ian Thornley and Big Wreck with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra, the Tower of Power Horns, Manteca, the Northern Pikes, Chantal Kreviazuk, Sarah Slean, and most recently for Stephen Page in concert with the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra. Jim's concertino for cello was performed by American phenom soloist Cicely Parnas and the Montreal Chamber Orchestra at the Bourgie Concert Hall. Am I saying that right? Bourgie sounds so bougie. Bourgie Concert Hall in the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. Interestingly, Jim's theme for Degrassi was featured in Drake's video, I'm Upset, which saw over 95 million views. Tulipani, Love, Honor, and a Bicycle has won several Best Picture and Audience Choice Awards at festivals worldwide, including Sonoma International Film Festival and Washington, D.C. Film Fest. It won the award for Best Soundtrack at Villamare Film Festival in 2019. So Thank you for joining me today, Jim.
Thanks.
I really appreciate you being here. Do you want to tell us, sort of flesh out your story briefly for any of our listeners who this might be their first introduction to you? A bit about who you are, your journey in the biz?
Well, I sort of am perfectly happy knowing who I am. In other words, just the idea of working in the background. I've never really wanted to be famous or anything like that. Like I mean, and even the projects that I work on, I usually just say, I work on these little Canadian things that people don't know about. But the fact is, I've been unbelievably lucky, and it's like a dream career or whatever for me. And I mean, I don't know what else I can say about that.
Yeah. Yep. All right. Well, we'll get into it. Here on the Vocal Lab, we sort of aim to shine a light into the industry through the lens of what I know now that I wish I'd known then.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, if you were starting your career all over again, what would you do differently?
And this sounds sort of discouraging or whatever, but one thing I should have done when I was in my early 20s was I should have had a good part-time job. I thought that, like, I went to Humber College. I went to high school, then grade 13 when there was a grade 13. And then just not on a lark, but instead of everyone going to university, which everyone was doing, I thought I would try this Humber College music program thing. It was like, I think it was $300 a semester, believe it or not. And
wow.
It just seemed like a non-risk kind of thing. So I went to Humber College for 3 years for their, at the time it was a very much a lauded jazz and commercial music program. And it was wonderful. And virtually everyone, who I still work with to this day, I met there, kind of thing. And and then, off we went out into the real world to earn a living. And, I was a trumpet player. I played in bands. That was when you could work 6 nights a week in a bar and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I ended up, after, being out there for 3 or 4 years, I ended up penniless, broke, the whole routine, and ended up being a bicycle courier and then rewrote all my grade 13 subjects, went back to university to try and get a real job, that whole thing. Right. And I regretted not having got the bicycle courier job about, several years earlier, in that the idea of trying to make 100% of my living income off art or music or the music business or whatever was unrealistic. I mean, there were guys who were doing it, but it was foolish on my part. I mean, I can still remember to this day going, the check for $50 didn't come today either. That thing. And also it's, April 30th. Dad, I need money for rent. Yeah. Tomorrow. It's due tomorrow. That thing. So it was tough. And I mean, it's good on one hand, things being tight financially, because it kind of made me super responsible or whatever for the rest of my life. But that's one regret, if you will, that and I think even today it's even harder. The idea of making a living right out of the gate, full-time, 100% is difficult and unrealistic. And there's no shame in it, getting a straight job. A full-time straight job. Like this is controversial. I've never thought you should get a job in a music store, because then everyone sees that you have a job. And that's my own prejudice. And all you people who work in music stores, I'm very sorry.
Now I get that. I get that. I agree with you that, like, there's no shame in having the job that supports the art while you're finding the art.
Well, wasn't Harrison Ford a carpenter, kind of thing? Like,
there's so many stories of that in the arts in general. That's like not just music, but in the arts in general. I mean, not everybody breaks it and becomes the next, Beyonce or whatever at like age 20. So it's a long and winding road.
I've often likened it, at least for a film composer, I've often likened it to being a brain surgeon, in that for the first, in your 20s, you are spending money. It's costing you a fortune. You're either an intern or like you're not doing the thing for a very, very long time. And it's, you have to accept that.
And so on the flip side, what would you do the same all over again in your career?
You know what? Humber College was great. That was a really good move. Really loved it there. I really sort of, blossomed there, if you will. Let me think. I also, after Humber College, I studied with a guy named Dr. Samuel Doyle at the Royal Conservatory, and studied like orchestration and counterpoint and classical composition. And that was great. It's funny. I think there's nothing like, it's almost like if I'd known things were going to work out by the time I was 30, I probably would have been a lot less angst filled, because I thought it was over. Like when I was 25, I thought, like I said, I went back to U of T, took a degree in engineering, and just thought, well, the music thing didn't work out. But then I gave it another go.
So let's talk for a second about clearly you are an educated musician. We happen to be in an industry, music as a whole, where there's widely varying levels of education. And it's okay that there are widely varying levels of education. Some people do it beautifully by ear. I believe that I am correct in saying Paul McCartney doesn't read a note of music.
He seems to do it just fine.
Right?
Stevie Wonder probably doesn't read at all.
And
no, you don't think he reads at all?
I'm guessing you are correct. And then there are others who are extremely educated, and there's benefits and drawbacks on both sides of that equation. So do you want to talk a little bit about how because specifically the area of music that you've gone into in terms of like scoring and arranging, and that even that you don't necessarily have to be as theory savvy. It can still happen by ear, especially with the technology that we have today. So it's not a foregone conclusion, but it is usually more present in that part of it. Do you want to talk a little bit about how those things, affected each other in,
what's
in
an interesting
your career?
Thing, for example, I don't want to work with any guitar player who can read. I'm just saying that as no half decent guitar player I've ever met can read a note. And now that's a silly thing because I've worked with lots of great guitar players who can read anything. But I'm just saying there's something about the real McCoy rock, rock roots, whatever have you, guitar player, that the way they're wired, that they're so used to using their ears and this other instinct that I'd almost prefer they don't read, because there's something about the way they've learned how to play I'm sort of, it's like reverse prejudice, right? Oh, you can read? No, I don't want to work with you. But otherwise, it all depends on the genre. Like I said, rock and roll, all that whole area, reading is irrelevant. But once you're into, obviously, anything to do with classical music or studio work or even jazz, the reading thing is a very big deal. And there's something, it's a fun art. In other words, I also play the trumpet. I've retaken it up. And there is an incredible challenge, like a professionalism of sitting there, plunked down in front of a piece of music you've never seen before in your life and try to play it perfectly and make it sound musical. And that's a thing. And that's a cool thing. And it's an old school skill, but there's something really great about that. And if we're talking about giving people advice about as they're coming up, the one theme that I was going to say is diversification, in that when you're starting out, sure, you only want to do, let's say in my case, I only want to score movies. That's all I want to do. But on the way there, I've done everything from, all these different playing situations, all these different writing situations. Like, you just do a whole bunch of stuff, and then hopefully one of them catches fire and takes off. And so similarly, being able to read music, why not? It's like learning another language, being bilingual. Like, why not do that? Especially if you have time. Yeah. But as far as the other stuff, I'm kind of self-taught anyway, like really, I'm one of the few people of my, social strata that doesn't have a university degree, right? Like most, my wife has a law degree, like our friends, everyone, I'm sort of, what do they call it in the States? I'm white male with high school education or whatever it is, right? It's a funny thing. Non-college educated whites or something.
You sound actually, I recognize a kindred soul in that you have spent more years in college and university than many.
Yeah, that's
with
right.
no degree to show for it.
Yeah.
Holla!
Yeah.
Me too.
And college is different. Like community college is not university. You know, I have a diploma. Big deal.
Right.
And the conservatory was just, private tutelage or whatever. That's okay. I mean, the only thing you need a degree for is if you want to teach at and
teach.
These days, if you want to teach at a community college, you need a master's.
I know. It's crazy how much education you actually need to go into any kind of faculty position at any
by the way,
teaching.
Here's another thing, because
place,
it's
that's
not
fine.
Because if you're coming up, nothing's going to happen for you. Chances are, when you're in your early to mid 20s, you might as well go to school. You might as well. It's not going to hurt you. And you don't necessarily need to take music. Take English. Take, philosophy. Like get an education so that you are a good hang. So that you actually, that you've been taught how to think and how to reason and how to be creative and all that, and been exposed to great literature and art. Like, that's good. That's a good education.
And that actually, that circles into, this is not going to be the smoothest segue in history, but we were chatting before we hit record today and talking about in the scope of a gigging musician, the hang is every bit as
very
important as the performance.
And I was also saying that in light of today's Zoom pandemic social media world, there's so lack of that as there used to be. Like, it's so important to the human connect. It is so important, and it's just not the same.
It's not the same, and it's funny because music is simultaneously a very social endeavor and a very solo endeavor. So for a lot of us, that hang time with the band between sets, that is our 100%. Social connection. Those are our peers. Those are the people, like you said, those are the people who share the same war stories. And it's the common ground. And when I was gigging a lot, I looked forward to that piece of it every bit as much, if not sometimes more, than the time on stage. And I agree with you that if you don't have any, and it doesn't necessarily have to come from formal education, but any worldly experience, if you have, whether you've pursued those skills on your own or you've been taught in a classroom, but that ability to, think for yourself and not just parrot back things, that's what makes
old school read. Although these days, to tell you the truth, we tend to say as much, well, I read this neat thing, as opposed to, I heard this cool podcast. It's actually it's not that far off, but anyway, that's right. It's just nice. Yeah. You want to be well read. Yeah, I think that's good.
And in talking about your schooling experience, you referenced that a lot of the connections that are still your, whether they're social connections or whether they're the people that you work with, currently originated in that time. And it's very similar for me. Obviously I know more musicians now than I did then, but I still have this like core group of people that I went to Cap University with. We all went through the jazz program, and like, I don't work in jazz anymore, but they're still that's still my it's people. So speaking of relationships, do you want to talk in the development of a career from the time that you are deciding to go to Humber College and be better at what you're doing to where you are now? There's a lot of relationships that play into that along the way. What have been the pivotal relationships that have helped you in that journey?
Well, I know that when I was, it was a very long and frustrating road. Like I really didn't start to quote unquote make it until I was in my late 20s. And that was, so it was a 10-year slog, as it were. Sending reels in, to, like in my particular case, I saw that the route to being a film composer, which is something I had wanted to do since I was, in my teens or whatever, because realistically I thought, well, being a songwriter, it's an unrealistic thing to pursue because the chances of you writing hit songs, blah, 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 I just didn't feel as though that was going to happen. But the idea of writing music for film and television seemed a much more realistic and attainable goal. And so in Toronto, the way one route into both making a living and getting into recording studios and writing for picture and all that stuff was doing music for advertising, jingles, as it were. And in Toronto, particularly in the 80s when I was coming up, it was a very vibrant studio scene for that, as vibrant as Chicago or New York City. It was humming, and there was a lot of people doing it. And actually, I remember being so disillusioned hearing like some of these jazz stars, local jazz guys did commercials. I went, say it ain't so. It just seemed so. But so I sent reels around trying to get into all these music production companies for years and years and years, and just couldn't get in. And it was like just about, like I said, maybe half a dozen years or more of trying that. Finally, someone responded positively to it, and then away I went. That working for this one jingle producer, so that was huge. Okay, like, and then the other thing simultaneously, there was one musician that, because the feeling was, Billy Joel has that great lyric, no one knows how good I really am. It was in Rosalinda's eyes. The idea that people just couldn't tell. Like, come on, I'm great. Like give me a break. And the frustration of you send some tape and they listen to it. They but there was this one guy in town who was a producer, composer dude that I went, he can tell. And so I sent a tape to him, and through a more circuitous route of someone recommending me to him or whatever, I ended up working for him for 10 years as his orchestrator, conductor, kind of thing. And so that was wonderful. Like, if anyone, I consider him, my sort of mentor or whatever. But that was the thing. Finding, I think that's an old fashioned thing. Find someone who, and pursue them, to work for them or to, and it worked, it was great.
Transitioning from working in the jingle industry, which like I grew up because that was what my dad did in Vancouver. That was Griffiths, Gibson and Ramsey in Vancouver. Yeah. And
so
I do. And the 80s, that was the heyday, right? That was when jingles were alive and well.
New Zealand to shoot a beer commercial.
Yeah.
We got to go to South Africa for this one.
Yeah.
It was nuts, and the budgets were insane. And I remember being in the Manteca Sound with a room full of Toronto Symphony players for some stupid beer commercial. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
I loved it.
And then, unfortunately, music went away in commercials to a great degree.
I was gone by then, so I didn't read it.
Yeah. So let's talk about the transition out of advertising into film and TV.
Okay. Well, the very first, like what I always tell people who want to get into scoring film and TV, a very common route is you score short films for emerging filmmakers, right? So I scored my first short film for it was an ad guy, like who on like me, he wanted to, had aspirations for doing other things. Well, he did this little short film, and because I was associated with this producer I was working for, I scored that short film. And while doing advertising, I was always looking for projects like that to work on, because the other thing about doing short films, at least when I was doing it, and to this day, you don't get paid for them. You do them for the idea of establishing relationships with filmmakers and getting your work exposed, and no one else is getting paid anyway, so it's not like you're being taken advantage of. But because my livelihood was being taken care of by advertising, I could pursue all these creative projects and did avidly, to the point where I was able to then I started doing TV series, like working for other people. At that actually ad play at that Jingle House, and started getting that happening, so that by the time that Jingle House folded and I had to go out on my own, which was scary, I did the transition that way. I often joke, I'd still be working at that Jingle House if they hadn't closed. You know, I never would have left the security.
You got pushed out of the nest.
I did, and it was scary. But the very first gig I did coming out of that was this was in like 2000, was a reality TV series about plastic surgery where when I scored it, I had to have my hand over the screen so I wouldn't have to look at the surgeries. It was so brutal, it was that kind of thing. But it was a regular gig, and I did it. And at that time, actually, that's when Degrassi started, and things it was a lovely sort of lucky shift from 10 years of advertising to the next stage. It just kind of worked out, luckily.
And were there people that overlapped, or was that a thing that you really had to like pursue that crossover?
Completely different.
Yeah.
No. As a matter of fact, I would sort of not really mention I was doing advertising. You know what I mean? I wouldn't really include that in my...
it was the dirty little secret.
Although here's an interesting thing, is that in the same way it took me a really long time to break into advertising, it similarly took me a really long time to break into film and television, in that same thing. While I was doing advertising, I was constantly sending out reels to try and get film and TV work, and sending out reels to try and get an agent and all that sort of stuff. So I got a call from, it was at the Feldman's office, actually, the Feldman's out there, for this series. I think they tried every single composer in Canada. And they finally went, well, let's try this guy then. Or Feldman, we'll try this guy. And I ended up getting the gig. And that was the start, that everyone that I met on that gig led to a whole other network. I got things from the editor, from the post-production supervisor, from the mixer, from it was this incredible opening, and it was like that was an enormous break. And my only, I'm not going to get into my only regret, because I did a big mistake with that one, where I sort of screwed around the Feldmans on that, because I thought, they shouldn't get so much money. I was very foolish, and I regret that. And I should have done that. I sort of made enemies, if you will, that I have fixed. I have since fixed them, but I shouldn't have done that.
But I think that that's a really great thing to actually, if you're comfortable doing that, to talk about for a second, because that is a thing that young people, or because I don't know that it's necessarily age dependent, but emerging artists, newer in the industry, they need to know those pieces where those agents.
I was an idiot. I was stupid. And
they get paid that money.
I ended up making good with that particular agent by bringing him a television series years later. Yeah. I just sort of patched that up, but I felt bad about it.
I think in the long run, we realize that they make their money not because they're sitting behind a desk just waiting for the things to roll in. They're doing their part too, and it might fluctuate on different gigs what that is, but over the long run, it usually works out to they're earning their percentage.
I have no defense.
No. I'm not really asking for one. I think it's worth noting that we all fuck up, and you made a point of making the amends and bringing different business to them to patch that.
But speaking of the advertising thing, so I got this big gig through the Feldmans, and it was, like I said, an incredible opportunity. And then the editor from that job put me forward to this feature film that was being directed by Russell Mulcahy, who had directed the Highlander movie and had directed all those Duran Duran epic rock videos and stuff. He was remember film directors were rock video.
Yeah.
Thing.
Yeah.
So I'm meeting with him on set because the editor is telling him how great I am and stuff. And I said that I was working on a movie and I was using an orchestra. He says, "You can afford to hire musicians?" And I said, "You know what? I make a pant load of money doing advertising. I don't mind taking a hit on art projects, right?" I'm just sort of being ballsy and saying this.
Yeah.
And the director, Russell Mulcahy, "Same with me, mate." He's Australian. I was a terrible Australian accent. But "Same with me, mate." So it was kind of cool, like by admitting that I'm doing this, I'm getting the filthy lucre from advertising to fund my art pursuit. That kind of, I think that might have done it. You know?
Yeah.
That might, or that was resonant to him. So again, that was why they hired me to do this movie. I have no idea, but it worked out great, you know?
Well, and I think that speaks to the bigger piece of, and a lot of guests that I've had on, we've talked about this concept, and it's one that I'm not sure people think about quite so transparently when they think about music to get go.
Yeah.
And that is that, just like every other industry, it is built on relationships.
Yep. Oh, it's only built on relationships. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I interviewed Mark LaFrance recently. I don't know if you know him, singer, drummer, great guy. And he was telling a story about having, as a younger guy, been introduced to Bob Rock and not knowing who he was.
Yeah.
And just being really nice. And ultimately, Bob hired him for a whole shit ton of work over the years. And he used it to illustrate the point that you can't afford to be a dick.
No.
Especially if you don't know who you're talking to.
Period. And it's funny, at the same time, like they say, in order to be successful in the entertainment business, you have to be really aggressive, right? They say that. We got to make phone calls. And I was always terrible at that. Okay. Yeah. I was the worst self-promoter, the worst networker, all that sort of stuff. Couldn't do it. Wasn't blessed with it. Sort of, it's my, Irish Catholic brain. We're talking about money and it is not cool. That whole repressed kind of thing, shy, and I used to think that I wished I actually was more aggressive. That I had a friend who'd like phone a producer at home on a Sunday, that kind of thing. Like I never do that, but I seem to have sort of done okay in spite of that. And maybe it's because I'm nice. Maybe it's because he's a good guy, and also I always tried to be really good. At what I do, like be really. I was never really interested in people toiling away at cooking shows and complaining about their little gig. Like I wanted A-list top shit, and I was just focused on that, and I would just, that's all I was interested in pursuing that, working only at that level, and I don't know, that's a big chunk of it.
Yeah,
and being discerning, like going, no, this sucks. Or I suck, like being very aware of where you're at and not to my detriment, maybe too self-critical, but you gotta be if you want to be really good.
I agree with you. And I think it's a fine line because I think as artists, it's really easy for us to fall into that pit where nothing is ever good enough.
No, I know. Yeah.
And that's not useful.
No.
But it's also not useful to believe our own press and think that we are the most amazing thing and we walk on water, because that is not ever going to make us better at what we do. And as artists, we should be pursuing excellence in our chosen art form.
Yep. And just being aware of it. Yeah, it's, I mean, the flip side of that also being too critical is that if in order to be a commercially creative person, in other words, whether you're doing advertising or writing music on demand, which is essentially what film scoring is that you can't let the editor of your own personal editor kick in too soon. Like you can't like put your fingers on the keyboard, go, no, that's no good. Yeah. You have to just somehow find that fine line between plugging through and knowing that it'll eventually get good, or knowing when to punt and go, actually, this isn't any good. I'm just going to start again. Like that. That's always been my challenge, is being prolific. It's difficult to be prolific, and the only way to be prolific is to do it lots. Not like everything you do is great. It's more like, well, no, you just got to keep doing it until it is great.
Are you one of those guys that, like, so in terms of like a writing process, are you one of those guys that sits down at 8:45 every morning and writes for 4 hours, or do you write when there's a project at hand or when the muse hits, or like, what's your process?
I really thrive on a deadline, and I really thrive on a picture. Like that's, like I said, whether it's a TV episode, a feature film, a short film, or what have you, like that really, it makes it not easy, but inspiring, and also, like I said, and there's something wonderful about knowing there's going to be live human beings sitting in chairs playing your thing on Monday, right? So you better have a thing for them to play. And also, I'm also inspired by, like, for example, when I'm doing arrangements for people like Stephen Page or whatever, well, the Vancouver Symphony is going to be playing this and they're really good. So I'm going to make this really good. I'm going to craft this beautiful arrangement, and because I know that it's going to be played by like the absolute, peak musicians, and they're going to read every nuance that I put into it and stuff. So that's inspiring. But the flip side of that is when I don't have any work, or a specific project, I find it very difficult to write music. Yeah. I mean, I had this wonderful arrangement for about 10 years or so, where there was this orchestra in Montreal called the Montreal Chamber Orchestra, and they would play anything I wrote. So every season, they'd apply for a Canada Council grant. I wouldn't get it, and then I'd do it anyway. And I just know, they got a concert. Well, we've got this young cellist who won this competition. She's doing a concert with us December 13th. Do you want to write a piece for her? It's our 40th anniversary. I said, okay. And then, I wrote it so that it was ready in time to rehearse and play. And it was awesome, to do that. But I kind of need that. Like I said, I need the carrot being dangled or whatever. The idea of there's a sunrise, I'm going to write a nice piece. I can't do it. As much as I'd like to, I don't work that way.
And you've worked with a lot of vocal artists.
Yep.
Do you arrange only for instruments, or do you also do vocal arrangements?
I do both.
You do both?
I mean, like I said, I have to do it all. When I got hired, bizarrely, my big break, finally getting into advertising in my late 20s, was this jingle producer who was, like many producers, wasn't necessarily fully musically literate, but he was a music producer, so he could tell guys what to do and stuff. His regular full-time composer, writer guy was becoming much more busy and successful and wasn't available all the time. So I would then go in, and my job was to do vocal arranging for the creme de la creme of the Toronto studio vocal scene, who did not need any vocal arranging help.
Right.
Like telling Joel Feeney how to harmonize a chord is the most preposterous thing. But I was there as a hand-holding component. And the way and I'm sure this is your experience, the way you arrange for vocals is it's all oral. You don't write it down. You don't go, here's your chart. It's more like, you sing this note, you sing that note, you sing that note. Let's try that. Like that's how you go, me, 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 me. You know, it's the same as you arrange vocals. It's the only way to arrange them. Because again, vocalists, sure, the creme de la creme of the old school studio vocal, mafia could read fly shit, but that's not a skill that's used anymore. And it really,
most in the contemporary like pop and rock world, I think it is safe to say that the significantly larger portion of singers are not readers. No. There are some of us who can go in and read a chart, but I agree with you that most of us don't.
It like guitar players, singers' ears are so well developed and their memories are so well developed that you can get a fabulous background vocal arrangement out of thin air just by talking. So, but I mean, again, it's not my strength, but I know how to do it. And I know how to do it just by using my ears. And I love pop music, so I know what a good thing is. I know what a good voice is or whatever.
Thanks for joining us today. That was actually just part 1 of our interview. And I would love it if you come on back Thursday to catch part 2. Can't wait to see you then.